views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Hey there, welcome to the Bronx Buzz. This is our weekly program where we talk to, writers, videographers, photographers, journalists. In this case, for this evening, we really have a wonderful program for you. I am personally very excited about it, and of course professionally too. There is a brand new book out. It's called South Bronx Battles. This is the book. And it is written by Carolyn McLaughlin, who is our guest for the whole show today. We're not going to split it up at all. Nice to have you with us, Carolyn.
Thank you.
Carolyn wrote this book, and I will tell you right off the bat, it immediately becomes a very important chronicle of the Bronx, the South Bronx, during the period of time that you wrote about, which is really 70s through the current. For people who don't know, Carolyn had been the executive director at the former Citizens Advice Bureau and then ultimately Bronx Works, and retired in 2013. Do we have that right? And then you set out to write the book. First of all, congratulations. It is an epic work. Anybody interested in the Bronx has to check it out, South Bronx Battles. But really, my hat's off to you. I went through it, as you know, and congratulations.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
As you were living the life of somebody who worked for, helped create CAB and Bronx Works, did you say to yourself, I've got this can be a book, I should do this? And then as you went, you jotted notes and said, or later, she's shaking her head, no. And then later on, you said afterwards, after you retired, you said, wow, what I just saw was a book. Just tell me about the gestation of the creation of the book.
No, it wasn't that at all. I mean, I did not consider myself a writer at all. I mean, the only thing I ever wrote were proposals and
grants
and job references for people.
Right, there you go.
So otherwise, other people, so I never wrote. No, I thought after I retired that I would write up sort of a history of Bronx Works, but focusing on the issues that we worked with: homelessness, children's programs.
She doesn't have enough fingers, folks.
Issues facing
senior citizens. We're going to go through those issues.
College guidance,
all those things.
AIDS,
right.
All those programs. So I thought I would write up, because I thought we were on the forefront of a lot of them.
It was
so
worth
I thought,
telling.
Yeah, and that I'd write it from the point of view of issues that we worked on, the schools, when they were breaking up the high schools, for example. And it was just by chance that somebody I knew introduced me to somebody he knew who had written a book that was published by University of California, sent an email to the publisher about me, and she was interested, but wanted a broader book about the South Bronx.
Once you started, did it flow like water and you were like, well, of course I'll tell this and then I'll tell this? Or was it one of those things gee, I forgot about that, and then you had to go look it up and start pulling teeth to figure out what the heck was going on?
Well, sort of both. I mean, one was that it was the editor and I struggled a little bit with the structure of the book, and at one point we restructured it for the chapters around decades, blocks of time, rather
70s,
than
80s,
by
90s,
issues,
right.
Rather than by issues, whether or not it was crime or housing or whatever. So we did it by decades. So the book at one point was restructured.
Let me just interject about that, because the interplay between the chronology that you set up and then how those things developed, where we talk about, and now it's already a phrase, Decade of Fire. We know about
Vivian's
the
film.
Vivian Vasquez film.
Yeah.
And then you move through all the other things. But that naturally follows, that is the story of the Bronx and the South Bronx during those years.
Right. So Right, so the stories sort of weave in and out. I mean, there's an introductory chapter, and then there's a chapter on why the Bronx became the poorest congressional district. What does that mean? How did that happen? And what's the significance of that? And why did it stay the poorest congressional district? And I think that's an interesting chapter, because I think a lot of people misunderstand that, the poorest congressional district.
There are many phrases like that that are thrown out that stereotype the borough, and certainly that section.
Well, I
of the
think
borough.
people think that means people in the Bronx are poorer than they are in other places. And one of the points I try to make is, no, poorest congressional district is simply that there's more poor people. It's a bigger percent of the population in the congressional district. Not that the people there are poorer than they are in other places in the country. In fact, I argue that they're maybe less poor than in some other parts of the country. I mean, they fit the definition of living below the poverty line, but there's just a bigger percent of the population.
One of the things that I thought about as I was reading the book, and I, like you, like many of us, we know what we went through in the burning of the South Bronx in the 70s, and then we go into the crack epidemic, and then there's an HIV epidemic which followed, or I forget already which.
They're both
which
in
is
the
with,
mid-'80s, yeah.
In the 80s, and then other crises developed in terms of whether it be housing and then senior citizens, and then at one point in the book you say, well, we never developed youth programs. Talk to me about the Bronx, or CAB and Bronx Works, and how you had your antenna up to determine what was going on, and then you were actually, which you get a lot, you and your colleagues get a lot of credit, able to come up with stuff to address those issues. And what I loved about the book, it chronicles every one of those issues for all of us.
Yeah.
So just talk to me about the success of the organization to be able to address all those things.
CAB started with this model from Great Britain that were easily accessible storefronts where people could come in with any sort of problem and staff would try to help them.
Citizens Advice Bureau.
Yeah, so in England, it was being referred out to somewhere else. If you had a housing problem, they would refer you out to a housing advocacy group or a housing provider. Well, for us, there was no place to refer people, so we worked on those problems. So we worked on the housing problems. We directly helped people. We worked on the welfare problems. We worked on the other entitlement problems, employment problems. So we started, trying to solve people's problems ourselves.
But before I let you go on, one of the things that comes clear, and I know it's something very personal to you, you worked with individuals, and despite how difficult some of these problems may turn out, and some people say, how could you possibly solve that? You actually helped them navigate the system so they could figure out whatever it was that was ailing them.
Yeah, we did a lot of that, and we had a big advantage over a person trying to solve their problems. I mean, we had phones. A lot of then you'll remember people were putting their dimes and then their quarters in payphones.
They'd stand in the street and
call their welfare worker, call their landlord. They hang up on them. They run out of quarters. They can't
So
call.
you had resources.
Yeah, we had resources. We had typewriters. We could send letters. We had a photocopy machine that didn't always work, but we had a photocopy machine. We could keep records of who we spoke to. We had some authority when we contacted people. I mean, more than a person on their own. So we had some resources that, weren't that apparent, but more than what an individual had.
You were also able, and frankly, there are many organizations in the Bronx, and we are going to talk about the development of not-for-profits in the Bronx. You were also able to actually get grants and get support, and somebody who's been involved in Bronx politics and everything else, that's not so easy to do because you were able to maintain kind of a non-political stance in a realm where you need political connections to get the money.
Yes, we always stayed. We were never affiliated with any particular elected officials, and we stayed out of that. So when an elected official might ask me to do something, I just wouldn't do it. If they wanted to support us for some reason or give us a grant, they could, but I never went asking.
And I will give you a solution to one of the reasons for that is because what you were proposing was undeniable. You really want to help the
Yeah.
people of the Bronx. You really want to solve a drug epidemic. You really want to deal
Yeah, and
with
if they
housing.
wanted a reliable agency, they could support us, you know, that was really going to do the work. So we always had, I think, a lot of credibility and a lot of integrity. So, you know, as we grew, when the city was looking to do something in the Bronx, even though there was an RFP process, a lot of times they would try to make sure we knew that this RFP was coming out. I mean, we were seen, I think, by over several city administrations as the go-to agency in the Bronx. But, you know, how we grew. So we started with these storefront offices.
Right.
Then we got a storefront that was particularly for seniors. We had some money from the Department of Aging. And then there was some McKinney money, and we had a storefront particularly for homeless people. So the storefront for seniors under Mayor Dinkins' administration, they were contracting out the senior centers. The senior centers used to be run by the city, and the city workers worked in them.
And when they came to the Bronx or came to the South Bronx, it was logical because they were, frankly, well-run programs, effective programs, and they knew the money wasn't going to go.
And in
be
the case
wasted.
of the senior centers, the first one was Morris Senior Center, which is a large center. The seniors were allowed to vote who they
Wow.
wanted. And they all had used our walk-in office. So it was like 99-1. And we never looked at who that one person was that didn't vote for us.
Listen, you
I'm just
let it go.
coding. So, and then when they started doing the shelters, the Tier 2 shelters, before there were Tier 2 shelters, there were Tier 1 shelters, like Roberto Clemente State Park. I
Right.
don't know if you
Of course.
ever saw that. These congregate shelters where men, women, and children slept on a gym floor. Then they
Incredible.
started, it was again under Mayor Dinkins that they started closing those and moving to these Tier 2s. So when the city was looking for providers or contracting these out, we were already providing a lot of services to homeless people.
Within
or a
this,
walk-in
within
office.
this very, first of all, we're going to need about 4 hours tonight. So
I'm sorry.
folks, I hope because no, we've got a lot. There's a lot to do, but we're going to try to fit it all in within this conversation. Without unwittingly, you heard from Carolyn McLaughlin, and the book is South Bronx Battles. Many of the different issues because you just dealt with them
Yeah.
all. We're going to take a break. We're going to take
Okay.
a short break. We're going to come back. I have some names and other people that are in the book that are going to be familiar to a lot of people. I'm going to make some of my own comments about it, and then we're going to bring it up to date and talk about some of those issues and how Ms. McLaughlin looks at it today. Don't go away. More of the Bronx Buzz right after this.
Sure, I look cute now, but when my owner lost his job, it was rough. I was living on the street, and one night, me and this Cocker Spaniel got into it so bad, I wound up looking like an ice cream cone. I cried a little bit, but thankfully I got rescued, so I'm running, I'm jumping, all back to my old self, and I'm ready to give unconditional love, even if you put a lampshade on my head.
It's not always easy being a dad.
Do you have panda asthma too? Does that run in the family? This is the home of the most priceless kung fu artifacts.
But when you make an effort,
Dad, we're not supposed to touch anything. Oh, sorry. Go along, son.
it's always worth it.
Whoa!
The smallest moments can have the biggest impact on a child's life. Take time to be a dad today.
I am gonna get you. I'm gonna get you.
Call 877-4DAD-411 or visit fatherhood.gov to learn more.
You know what, guys? There's a lot of tree branches and dry brush over here. We should probably move the bonfire over there.
I'm guessing Smokey liked that idea.
Hey, it's Ava, and this is Tess from Vivo's Do It Yourselfie, where we recreate the hottest looks from today's biggest music videos.
After cleaning out our closet, we have a lot of clothes we don't wear anymore.
Like this old t-shirt.
It's not garbage, it's actually a brand new rug.
And to make it, all you need to do is cut, tie, and glue.
Cut the t-shirt into strips
Tie the strips into knots.
and glue the knots to the bath mat. I love it. Give your garbage another life.
And recycle.
Music.
Okay, back with you on the Bronx Buzz. Our guest is the author of this book. She also is the very familiar face of Bronx Works, formerly Citizens Advice Bureau. We're talking about the development of the South Bronx and how Bronx Works affected that and all the things that are in this very fabulous chronicle. I want to just bring up the concept of not-for-profits and how you position them in terms of solving these very difficult problems. Certainly Bronx Works was in there. I think we have over 1,200 not-for-profits now in the Bronx. I always believed and have talked about it that Freddie Ferrer, and you quoted him and mentioned him a number of times in the book, that he paved the way because he understood that these problems that he lived through, who grew up on Fox Street, these problems are not going to get solved by city agencies. And I think he recognized the strength of Bronx people. Nos quedamos. We're going to stay here. We're going to do it ourselves. My evaluation of his role in this somewhat correct?
may very well be.
Okay.
He was always very supportive of us. He was our city council person before he became borough president, and he would invite me to these VIP receptions, which I wasn't sure why I was lucky enough to be invited, but I think it was trying to, support nonprofits.
Well, I guess that's my point, and this is not mentioned in the book. There was a moment that he stood underneath the L at Yankee Stadium and unveiled a campaign that said, "Don't dump on the Bronx."
I remember that.
And that's right. And I think at that time, for me, as somebody who was covering the Bronx, that kind of coalesced a lot of what you had experienced, because all of those people who stayed after the Bronx was burning, et cetera, it kind of defined what I think we're dealing with even today. Talk to me about some of the people now. As you're going to love reading the book, people involved in Bronx stuff. People like Paul Lipson, people like Vivian Vasquez, we've already mentioned her, Dr. Mark Nason and Bobby Sanabria. I mean, these are people that I know, people who are leaders of organizations. Talk to me about those people.
Well, one of the people that's in here, there's a story about him, is Ralph Acevedo, who's now the district manager of Community Board 2. But we had a history with him from when he was a student, and we have a picture of him in the book on a pile of rubble when he was a teenager. And he sort of grew up at CAB, Bronx Works. And so his stories throughout the book. The cover was done, we were talking earlier, by
Tat Screw.
That's Screw BG 183, and his story about being a graffiti artist is in the book, and how he started tagging trains and then moved to murals, and the success of that group. So, a story about the fight to save Ostos Community College when that was going to be closed, the fight to get the new Lincoln Hospital, when the old Lincoln Hospital was a hellhole.
A fight against incinerators in Hunts Point. I mean, this goes on. And every one of those things, and what happens as you read the book, every one of those things, like you turn a page, and then so we started a program for this kind of thing. One of the things that ties it together, and by the way, had you not written the book and we had had this conversation, I would have said to you, because I could see you, we're going to talk about this, I would say, you probably should write a book, because every one of these issues you have dealt with. But one of the themes that comes through and goes all the way up to today is the notion of housing.
Housing is throughout the book.
It's throughout the book, and it's still I don't want to say a puzzlement, but it's still a big issue. Talk to me about, from your perspective, gentrification is a very big thing. It is a central issue, and the issue is displacement. How can we deal with it at this point? If people are making the low incomes that we say we want housing to be affordable, and you're very clear about that, if people are making that much money, can developers build buildings, quality buildings, cheap enough for poor people to afford them, so that your advocacy, your ultimate advocacy, comes true in the long term?
Yeah, and that was one of the issues around the rezoning, like around Jerome Avenue, and will happen with the other rezoning. What you would need would be a lot deeper city subsidies. So it's not, the developers have, their financial models. So they would, in order to do more very very low income apartments. They need much deeper city subsidies. So the city has to make choices. Do they want to do more apartments, fewer with deeper subsidies? And they've been going with more apartments. You know, the mayor made a pledge of how many new buildings he was going to.
And you mentioned them toward the end of the book, something like the Wedco's Bronx Commons.
Yeah.
Do you see that as the kind of thing that can be duplicated, or are we really in a danger zone because it cannot be duplicated in the free market without these subsidies?
Oh, none of this can be done without subsidies. You can. I don't think. I mean, I'm not a housing expert. I'm going to put that out. But I think all these ones that are affordable, even though the incomes may be twice as much as people in the currently living in the neighborhoods can afford, all of them have subsidies. Mm-hmm. I think only the luxury apartments don't have subsidies.
Let's talk also about it's almost like if you were still at Bronx Works, what would you say about the opioid crisis? So now, for example, Councilmember Salamanca has put together, with the Third Avenue bid, they've put together, kind of an effort to combat it with what you need, a multi-pronged approach. What if, given the nature of where it's at, what do you think we need now to really solve this issue?
Well, I mean, partly there are these models, and I do talk about it, of harm reduction. So some of it, is is traditional drug treatment where people have to
syringe
quit using,
distribution. I mean, we've done that.
or quit using drugs. But the other part is harm reduction, where people work on using less with the goal of eventually using. Yeah, and certainly things like needle exchange. The opioid crisis, for the first time, is broad-spread. It's, throughout the country. It's not just in the Bronx. So there are broader, theoretically at least, broader resources that could help
to address things like this. What there's a whole chapter on it, but I'm going to let you talk about it. What things did you learn over the years? I mean, you sat there and watched, and frankly, she didn't do a lot of sitting, but she was there, and was there, and frankly worked on all of these issues, whether it be lack of affordable. I mean, we go through them again. I say we're going to run out of fingers, whether it be environment or senior help or young people. What do you come away with after? It was 35 years, right?
Yeah, 34.
Who's counting?
Yeah. So one of the things is, I think the Bronx has a lot of strengths, and I think efforts to promote community and community activism are important, and bringing people together. So that's one of the, you said one of
it
the
first.
things. Yeah, we ran social service programs,
you walk away with.
But also the community coming together, people getting to know their neighbors, building up. Part of what I think happened in the Bronx earlier was there was sense of community was destroyed by such a quick change of population. I think immigrants have been very helpful to the Bronx, the energy they bring, the goodwill they bring. I think the Bronx is, in a way, more integrated than other sections of the city, in the sense that you don't have neighborhoods that are all one ethnicity.
You make the point that the West Africans who came into the west side of the Bronx were integrated into the community. Everybody's like, oh, okay, now they're here. Oh, well,
yeah.
Okay.
And you didn't have
and there were Russian populations there. I mean,
you didn't have whole neighborhoods so much with one population. You had people living together in buildings. So I think that's, also a strength of the Bronx.
One of the things I heard from a lot, and now I did not grow up in that part of the Bronx, but one of the things I heard from a lot of the people who grew up in the Bronx prior to the 70s, when of course things were literally blown apart, is there was a rainbow, so to speak. Everybody lived that way, and I think we are coming back. If you look on my floor in my building, you could open it up and everybody's from a different place.
And people really valued that over and over again when I was doing the interviews for the book. People valued that, we had people from this country and that country and, this all together. And I think people really valued diversity.
One of the things that I think is finally emerging from my own, long work at covering the Bronx, and certainly comes out here, is I think we're finally defining a Bronx culture. that, and you summarize the book at the end. You talk about the arts and culture. I think for the first time, despite Nostradamus and all the people who fought like crazy to keep us going and keep us alive and keep us together, that finally people are saying, this is who we are. That's what I've learned after 25, even though I didn't write a book.
There's a lot of pride in the Bronx. I was just talking to people. People are proud of being from the Bronx. So I think maybe, years ago they weren't, but they are now. So I think that's one of the things I learned too.
I want to...
And I also think, people have more strengths than they're given credit for.
More?
Strengths.
Strength.
I tried to bring that out. Just all the strengths that people have.
We're still here.
Yeah.
I want to just talk about you, and one of the things you told me just beforehand, still gives you a thrill to volunteer on a Thanksgiving food line and those kinds of things. I mean, so what happens now? I mean, you completed this wonderful work, South Bronx Battles. What do you do next?
I mean, I don't
Still live
know.
in the Bronx? Still live in the South Bronx?
No.
Okay.
No, actually, I live in Yonkers, but
Okay.
it's a short ride to the
Short
Bronx.
ride.
I come to the Bronx a lot. My husband and I did volunteer a few times in the fall and
You can't
in the
stay
winter
away is what I guess I'm
at
getting
at Bronx Works Food Pantry, which is a great experience. There's it's on Saturdays, and over 110 families come, and
The
eat
old
food.
girls' club is named after you.
Yes.
What's the one thing looking back and you say, gee, we did all that, I wrote the book and all that. What do you want to be remembered by, for, about?
Oh.
That's a terrible question.
Question.
That's hard. And if she
I
doesn't
guess-
answer, read the book, you'll find out.
No, I guess I'm proud of the work of Bronx Works. I think it's a really very legitimate agency with high standards that really produces good programs and good services for people. The staff is wonderful. So I'm proud of all the people that made their careers at Bronx Works. There's many, many people that have been there over 25 years and are just extremely skilled.
I'm going to add that to me, the fact is that it's living and breathing, and it's going to go on, God willing, longer than you or I.
yes.
And that is really doing the same things for the same reasons, for the same
Yeah.
kinds of people,
Well,
and really
well,
trying to
Eileen
move us
Torres,
forward.
who's now the executive director, is
Right.
terrific. I mean, she's just wonderful. She's doing a terrific job.
Well, Carolyn McLaughlin, great job. The book is South Bronx Battles.
Thank you.
And folks, pick it up anyway. Now, you have a signing coming up?
Yes, there's the signing at
Be
Bronx
quick.
Works, June 13th at 11 o'clock at 1130 Grand Concourse,
All
the
right, there you
community
go.
center.
At the community center there. Carolyn,
have copies
thank
of
you.
the book there.
Thank you for the book. Thank you for
Thank
coming
you.
on.
It's great to
It
see you,
really
Gary.
is, for a lot of people, it's going to define what you knew and what you didn't know. People that you all know, it's all there. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.
Folks, that's all we're going to do for tonight. Actually, coincidentally, Monday night on Bronx Talk, we're going to be talking, can we build affordable housing in the Bronx? We'll have two developers who are involved in projects. That'll be Monday night on Bronx Talk. Good.